Hey, price of Canadian groceries are ridiculous.
We have a grocery prices problem in Canada. Here's how food prices have changed over the last couple of years. The year-over-year change gradually increasing from about 4% to around 10%. We've all felt this at the grocery store, right? But then look at the rate of general inflation. So the year-over-year change in the price of everything, not just food, that's quite a lot lower, telling us food prices have gone up disproportionately high.
At first, Canadians were shocked. And then, well, we all became angry. Grocery prices have increased exponentially, it seems, and we're looking to point the finger.
You're experiencing unprecedented profits while people are struggling. How do you square that with the record bonuses that you and your colleagues are receiving?
Last week, 30 pounds was $3.20.
Over the last several years, and since the COVID pandemic, Canadians have become very aware of soaring grocery prices. Everything has increased, some by a little, others by a lot. I, like many Canadians, wonder, are we being taken advantage of? Are we suckers with these high prices? Or are these high prices actually justified? Are Canadian grocery companies making excuses so that they can get more of this? Of course, that's why they're in business, is to make money.
This is very cute. Let's talk about what matters. Money.
I'm not disregarding that. However, it just depends on how much money are they actually making. What is their profit margin? Loblaw's share price and earnings have actually never been higher and is recording an extra $1 million per day in additional profit. That's additional profit over and above what they normally make. Now, in fairness, Galen Weston has turned the company around from where it was a few years ago. However, it sure doesn't look that great for the company when many Canadians are struggling just to put food on the table each and every week. Capitalism is a pretty brutal place. Warren Buffett. For comparison, here's the Dow Jones Industrial Average over the last 5 years, and here is Loblaw's market share price over the same time period. It would appear that Loblaws and other grocery stores are doing pretty well. Just like ingredients in a recipe, many complex factors go into determining the price of a grocery item on a store shelf, some of which you might not be aware of.
However, as of right now, the Canadian government and consumers are in the dark about just what that markup is.
Is it only 1% for some items, but then 15 to 20% for other items? Here's a glimpse into some of Loblaw's profits and their operating revenue. Some Canadians refer to this phenomenon colloquially as greedflation, accusing the grocers of taking advantage of the inflationary climate to earn excess profits at the expense of cash-strapped consumers with limited choices. The pandemic created the perfect storm for these three giants in a sense, with shares of Loblaws, Canada's largest grocer, increasing 80% in 3 years, with 3 dividend increases. Metro up 39% and also raised its dividend 3 times, and Empire up 27% with 3 dividend hikes. So these high profits are great for investors, however, not so much for consumers wondering just what the markup is and trying to afford groceries every week. The Canadian government has repeatedly called grocery executives to Parliament Hill to face mounting questions over rising food prices, but seem to keep hitting the same wall and hearing the same song and dance from these executives.
That is not an indication of bad practice. It's not an indication of some sort of profiteering. It's just an indication of a business operating exactly the way that it should.
Numbers don't lie.
I don't think you listen. I think you just
Canadian grocery stores have continually rebutted with the argument that their profit margins are very thin, that they can't afford to lower prices anymore, and that any government intervention would force them to pass costs on to the consumer. False to suggest that they are responsible for high prices, that food inflation is a global problem. It doesn't matter how many times you say it, write it, or tweet it, it's simply not true, and there are economic inputs at every stage. However, in the US, where there is a lot more competition in the grocery industry, food inflation has come down. Canada has tried to implement a grocery code of conduct for grocery stores to follow. If implemented, grocery stores such as Loblaws plead that legislation such as the Grocery Code of Conduct would force them to pass costs on to the consumer by approximately $1 billion.
We think it's going to be positive. I know there was a puzzling claim by Loblaw. They're claiming that the code will increase food prices by $1 billion. There's a lot of factors that impact food prices. The code will not increase food prices.
The Canadian Code of Conduct actually has two main parts. One, it would encourage more competition in Canada, which is great. The second part to this is that Canadians could easily shop and compare what every item costs at each store. We could see what it costs at one store and compare that to the cost of it at another store. This would allow for easy price matching and comparison. You can see where the resistance would come in here.
They're now reversing themselves, saying that yes, in fact, it will in fact make food cheaper for Canadians across the board. So this is a big reversal by Loblaw, but there is some people out there, including this one food economist, saying that the timing with Loblaw seems to be a little bit suspect.
You got me.
So that everyone is on the same page, a CEO, a CFO, all of the top executives, their main loyalty is and always will be to the company. Whether that be protecting the company's image, increasing share price, or reducing expenses, their main loyalty is and always will be to the company and to that company's shareholders. With less competition in the market, Canadian grocery companies can far more easily pass these costs on to the everyday consumer. So no CEO is going to say immediately yes to something that will probably impact their bottom line if they can help it. Top management will always try to defer or reduce expenses and increase revenue because it directly affects their evaluation by the board of directors and in the eyes of the shareholders. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm Aaron, a 20-year corporate accountant and analyst living in Western Canada. This is the second part of a 3-part video series that I've made regarding Canadian food prices. And by the way, I try to make it fun and entertaining.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Another factor is that companies aren't so eager to instantly open their books and reveal intimate details about their operations because they're a business. They want to maintain and conceal any competitive advantages that they may have.
Previously, a lot of big grocers were able to sort of force their suppliers to supply basically cheaper goods than they were able to afford.
So as of right now, many people are stuck having to pay whatever grocery stores charge for items. Some people are visiting dollar stores to save money. Others are budgeting and cutting back on how much they spend every week. Other people are going with cheaper, no-name brands to save money.
In fact, many Canadians are skipping the outer aisles of the grocery store, which are healthier but more expensive, in favor of the inner aisles of the grocery store, which are cheaper but less healthy.
So it's getting very expensive to feed your family nutritious groceries, fruits, vegetables, meat, almost bread, anything.
Give me all you got! Give me all you got!
Forget fine dining now. It seems like we're having to cut back even more than we already are on many things, as the cost of living just seems to keep getting higher and higher. And well, this is becoming everybody's new favorite thing. I'm kind of sick of it. I ate so much as a kid. I don't want to eat craft dinner anymore. Sorry. Brandy Dustin does most of her grocery shopping in the US, as she reported on a video on TikTok, and it raked in over 600,000 views.
So I live 45 minutes away from the closest grocery station. However, I live next to the US border, and the closest grocery store there is 15 minutes. So that is usually where I do most of my grocery shopping, even with the crappy exchange.
It totaled $85.04 or $117 Canadian. Of course, we also have to factor in the exchange rate and duty on that. But even with those factored in, she said she still saved money. She stated that if she had bought these items in Canada, she would have spent roughly $160 at her Canadian grocery store.
Suffering hugely, we're all trying to make it, and it is so much cheaper for me to go next door than it is to shop in my own country.
What companies do that is actually really sneaky is they've noticed that customers are more price sensitive, but they won't always catch a change in the quantity size. Sure, you probably know the price of a Kit Kat or the price of a box of craft dinner, but can you tell me the weight? How big is a Kit Kat? Oh, you got to think a little bit. So what companies often do is, well, this soda was once 12 ounces, but a year later, they might only make it 11 ounces, and nobody notices. Pretty soon, other companies follow suit. I believe that this is part of the reason for the increase, is that certain grocery companies began increasing prices right around COVID. Other companies joined in. It suddenly becomes the norm. As people begin to experience high prices more and more, they go from frustration to anger to gradual, slow acceptance. Pretty soon, people are saying, well, that's the way it is. It's been like that for 2-3 years now. Suddenly, companies have their way.
Excellent. While there looks like there's a lot of competition in Canada, this is actually not the case.
The fact that Canada's largest grocers have generally been able to increase these margins, however modestly, is a sign there is room for more competition in Canada's grocery industry.
However, there are other factors that we have to take into account. The devaluation of the Canadian dollar, the lack of purchasing power with our Canadian dollar due to a decrease in GDP per capita. The Canadian government has been trying to increase our GDP for the last few years. However, the GDP per capita has actually been going down. This is important.
My uncle Lloyd actually owned a small mom and pop grocery store, and he says usually our small stores, we only make about 10 cents profit on, say, a can of soup. However, multiply that 10 cents at larger companies by 10,000 units, and suddenly your profits are looking a lot larger.
Grocers make all of their money on volume. Even if they only make an extra $1 or $2 on each grocery purchase, if you make that billions of times, then you're probably looking pretty good.
Have you felt that you're just more and happier lately? That something's changed? You're a little bit crankier? I feel that it's hitting every middle class and working class Canadian pretty hard. So why are we so angry at food prices? Well, I feel that it's just another drop in the bucket of this never-ending sea of costs. We have the outrageous cost of housing. Now food is increasing, gasoline, the carbon tax, everything is hitting us and hitting us hard. So when we see grocery companies recording record profits higher than they've ever had before, and we see all these increases in their financial statements that I've reviewed, people are going to wonder what the heck is going on.
My bill just keeps going up. It doesn't matter how much I try to cut back.
There are a number of factors right here that affect Canadian food prices. Of course, all of these are factors to take into consideration. We have the devaluation of the Canadian dollar, the lack of purchasing power of Canadians due to our weak Canadian dollar and our struggling economy. This isn't news to anybody. However, grocery companies in Canada are in a very unique position to be able to pass those costs on to the consumer. They really don't have to absorb, if they don't want to, many of these costs, and they won't disclose their financial statements. I tried peeling over and reviewing these financial statements, and I, like many other professionals, could only get so far. There just isn't enough information. There are subsidies, different departments, numerous food items, and you can't get into it without a sufficient level of detail. So when grocery companies say, oh, there are a number of items such as the geopolitical climate, the economy, the carbon tax, the huge area of landmass that Canada has, they're right. However, they can just say, okay, we're going to add that on, and then pass that on to the consumer. This is my own opinion, but this is what I believe is happening after hours and hours of research. So when many Canadians and the working class are struggling just to pay their bills and everything is increasing, and we see all these large corporations that continue to get bigger and generate record profits, of course, it's going to kind of hit us right here. So by opening the door for more competition, this doesn't give many companies a choice because they'll be more forced to lower their prices in order to be competitive, just like the United States.
I feel like they're all in cahoots.
Struggling Canadians can only be financially squeezed so much before we just can't afford it anymore. Many Canadians are very upset because they're struggling just to pay their bills and having everything else continue to increase much more than it was before. You look at something and it was so much cheaper just 5, 6, 7 years ago, and now the prices for many things just seem outrageous. I will say this though, if a company is ever in a position where it has the ability to choose its profit margin and pass whatever financial stressors and burdens onto consumers with very little resistance because people are ignorant to the true costs of those items or they have little alternative options available to them, that usually doesn't end well for the consumer.